Hello there, this is Poppy Hillstead and Joe Wilkinson from Gossipmongers.
Hi.
David's not here right now.
No, he's not, but he's missing out because he won't know this, but I'm going to tell you. Always chatting about our mobile phones in between reading the gossips.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you know, but you can pre-order the new Samsung S20 at the Car Phone Warehouse at the moment.
Amazing. Does it do selfies and stuff?
Really good for selfies. You get up to £350 off if you trade in your old device.
Okay. Yeah.
And it also has 5G ready. I forgot to tell you that.
Oh, that's great. Sorted, yeah.
You going to do it?
I think I'm going to do it. I'm
going
going
to
to
do
go now.
it. I think everyone should do it, but that's just me. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm a Samsung guy.
Hello. This is a podcast about gossip, dirty laundry, chitter-chatter and backfence prittle-prattle. In each episode, Joe Wilkinson, David Earl, and Poppy the Postwoman invite you lot, the lovely listeners, to send in any juicy gossip you might have heard over the years. But, in this special end-of-year episode, we are going to be counting down our top 10 bits of gossip from 2019, chosen by our listeners on Twitter. So, sit back, pour yourself a tumbler of warm coconut milk. Welcome to Gampy Roslin's Muggers. No, Gandhi's Moccasins. No, Great Big Muck Spreaders. No. Well, sort of. But no. Gossipmongers. Yes, that's it. Gossipmongers. Let's do this. Let's count those rumors down. In at number 10. Poor old Len.
This is from Jamie. So this is an old story that got bandied around years ago within my family about my nan's neighbour.
I've got confidence in this song.
Yeah.
Don't know why.
Nan's neighbour.
Yeah.
Nan's neighbour's good. That's what you want to hear.
It was about 1995. My nan lived in a block of flats in Catford, southeast London. A quiet, lovely lady who minded her own business. She lived next door to an old chap called Len. Len had lost his wife, Doll, about a year before. Up until his wife's death, Len was a relatively quiet man, enjoying the odd game of bowls and a pint at the local, but was rather TV obsessed. This all changed, however, about 6 months after his wife's funeral. At a neighbourhood watch meeting, Len happened to reluctantly mention that he had met someone new. She was a widow like him, and that he'd always had an eye on her, but now that he was a widower himself, he felt able to make the move. Although slightly shocked by the news, my nan was relatively happy for him. A few months after that, Nan started to comment on loud music coming from Len's flat, sometimes at all hours, and a loud woman's voice, with Len shouting back at her.
Right.
She became increasingly concerned when she walked past Len's kitchen window one afternoon and could hear him shouting, "You've been a very naughty widow, and now I'll have to teach you."
Naughty widow.
You've been a very naughty widow.
Only to then glance through the window to see what looked like a young woman dressed in nothing but a black coat tied to a chair with Len stood over her, gyrating. This continued for quite a few weeks. The loud music, more glimpses through Len's window, revealing even more odd behaviour. And now other neighbours becoming equally worried as to what was going on.
I think we know what's going on.
Then one evening, on her return from the shops, my nan found Len out on the communal balcony, drunk and looking a bit agitated.
Oh, God.
When she asked him what was wrong, all he could say was, "Her head's come off, and I don't know what to do."
Your head's come off, and I don't know what to do.
Naughty widow. God.
Understandably mortified, my nan went inside and called my mum, who said, "Oh, don't worry, it's probably just an outpouring of grief over his late wife." But as far as my nan was concerned, Len might have done something terrible. Eventually, one of the other neighbours had had enough and called the police over concerns for the safety of this new woman in Len's life. Good old Len. What's he been up to?
Harmless old Len.
Yeah. Relatively quiet old Len.
Loved a bit of telly. Oh dear.
The police turned up, forced entry into Len's flat, and apparently, to their horror, amongst some 30-odd empty gin bottles, they found Len passed out, along with a female mannequin. Dressed in fishnet stockings, wrapped in a large black hooded bathrobe, along with the photo of the then Scottish widow's model, Amanda Lamb, glued to its face. Another separate mannequin head was apparently found in a bin liner, again with Amanda Lamb's face attached, with the word spare written on the back of it in lipstick.
Like he had to remind himself he's got a spare. Right.
Oh, wow.
I subsequently met Amanda Lamb about 8 years ago at a function.
Oh, what to talk about.
Yeah, it took every ounce of restraint to not recount that story to her. All the best, guys. Jamie. Well played, Jamie.
At number 9, The Smiths. A wonderfully written tale about a dirty sex tape.
This is from Ben. This juicy little bit of gossip started in the 80s, continued into the 90s, and may well continue on into the future. Here's hoping. My older brother, my sister for the 6th form, and myself all attended the same middle-of-the-road Surrey public boarding school. One day, one of the boys, Boy A, went round to his mate's house, and while he was there, he discovered a videotape upon which had been recorded the saucy antics of his friend's parents. From what I've heard, it included the father, we'll call him Mr. Smith, instructing Mrs. Smith to get your nylons off. Before walking into view sporting a fine pair of leather grundies with a zip. Then they got butt naked and started to fuck.
Get to the point.
Boy A did whatever any self-respecting, God-fearing friend would do in the same situation and took it upon himself to steal the aforementioned videotape, take it into school and show it to everyone in his house for a week or so, and then distribute it to all of the other houses in the school to enjoy. That could have been that, except that one day, at some point afterwards, it turned out not to be. A different boy had been waiting at the train station in his school uniform when a car pulled up. The window rolled down and a lady offered to give him a lift up to school as her son went there too. They chatted a bit on the journey. It became clear she was none other than Mrs. Smith. The boy may have said something about her nylons or about her husband's grundies. We'll probably never know what, but suffice it to say she knew exactly what he was going on about. The boy got deposited at school and Mrs. Smith went on her way. The next day, Smith Jr. was nowhere to be seen. And in fact, he never again returned to that school. But there were rumours that his parents did not take to it very well. The story went down in school folklore to be repeated by various gossipmongers over the year. That could have been that. Except that one day, at some point afterwards, it turned out not to be. One such gossipmonger decided it was a good idea to dust off the old Smith story to a dinner party of friends, strangers and acquaintances. That gossipmonger was my sister. The story went down extremely well and everyone had a great laugh at the Smiths' expense. Or so my sister thought. Soon after the meal had finished, however, one of the slightly older couples that had been in attendance made a hasty exit.
Oh my God.
Upon some very light detective work, it became apparent that their son had once attended the very same school that we had, and that they were Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And fuck me, if my sister hadn't just told the Smith story to the very stars of the 80s amateur fuck tape.
Oh, amazing.
That could have been that. Except that one day, at some point afterwards, it turned out not to be. You guys decided to start a gossip and decided that the Smith story would be perfect for it.
If he's got another level after this, then and that.
I like to think that the Smiths have put all this behind them for the umpteenth time and have moved on with their lives. However, a tiny evil piece of me can't help but hope that they'll be walking down the road in the very near future, only to hear Poppy yelling their story out of the window for the whole world to hear just one last time.
Oh, superb.
Next up, at number 8. A lot of listeners' favourite from 2019. This is the story of some kind of wally called Bonsoir.
It's from Tom. I have a bit of gossip concerning the provenance of a much-loved 70s hit song. I was told this gossip by my mum's ex-boyfriend, affectionately known as Bonsoir. It was the summer of '79, and Bonsoir and his mates were enjoying the school holidays by engaging in some...
Who's Bonsoir? His mum's ex?
Yeah.
His mum's ex-boyfriend,
It's
Bonsoir.
called Bonsoir. Fucking hell, amazing.
It was the summer of '79, and Bonsoir and his mates were enjoying the school holidays by engaging in some underage drinking at Holme Pierpoint Water Sports Centre in Nottingham.
Sounds like
Bonsoir.
the place to do it.
Whilst on a raft in the middle of a lake, one of the lads noticed a bottle that appeared to have some paper inside it. Instead of investigating further, they apparently all simultaneously and without any discussion began to chant, "Message in a bottle, message in a bottle, message in a bottle." This curious incident was soon forgotten as they continued with their lazy summer afternoon on the lake. Cut to the evening, and the lads had got tickets to see a hot new band, The Police, playing at their school. I looked this part up, and despite sounding utter bollocks, they did actually play at the school in 1979.
Oh, God. Okay.
They were enjoying some of the hits when all of a sudden the singer announced that they were about to try out a new song that they'd written that very afternoon. Lo and behold, they then launched into the song Message in a Bottle. To this day, Bonsoir is convinced that Sting overheard their on the lake and is still annoyed that he never received any songwriting royalties.
Bonsoir.
Absolutely incredible. Message in a Bottle by Bonsoir.
At number 7, a stone cold classic. About a young athlete with, I should imagine, a whacking great cock.
A friend of mine told me about a school sports event he went to where he was competing in the long jump. He was around 13 to 14 years old and represented his school in a Kent Schools Athletics Championships in the 1990s.
Oh, I'd left school by then.
He told me about another kid in the same event from another school. My friend said that during the heats, every time this other kid began his run-up, his knob would fall out of his underwear and flap around outside of his shorts.
Not Peter Beardsley.
Then, in midair, it would be out on display for all to see. He'd land in the sandpit and have to quickly pop it back in.
Literally the most innocent knob story.
But everyone watching his heats saw his knob every time he jumped. As you can imagine, the number of people watching the under-13s long jump event at the Kent Schools Athletics Championships wouldn't be too large, so his knob wouldn't have been seen by too many people. Or so you'd think. It's a twist. As he progressed further and further through the competition...
Unfortunately, he's good at it.
Making all the judges just liked him. As he progressed...
Get added on these.
It's crap at jumping, but... As he progressed further and further through the competition, making it through each round, more and more people gathered to watch. According to my friend, word of the knob flying out had clearly gotten round the event.
Oh, God.
So with every run-up... with every run-up, his knob would fall out. And as he flew through the air, the ever larger crowd of parents and other kids would get a full look at it. By the end, there were apparently about 100 people all gathered around the sandpit, watching him quickly poking his knob away after completing another impressive jump. I don't know if the flying knob kid took home the gold or not, but he definitely put on the best performance for the crowd. My friend went on to say that the next year, the crowd for the first heats at the long jump sandpit were huge. Not for the finals, for the heats.
On the off chance.
Clearly, those in attendance the previous year had spread the word about the flying knob kid with his cape. Sadly, according to my friend, the kid whose knob kept flying out wasn't competing that year. So the large crowd quickly dispersed. That's from Anonymous.
Oh, please write in and tell us who you are. Because I'm from Kent. I can find out who it is. Oh, God.
Fucking
I think
hell.
it might have been Michael Bates.
That was
Long
that was
jump.
amazing. That could be a film.
God, what a film.
Got an audition next week.
Yeah.
Long jump.
I love his routine of landing, quickly took it away.
I know, because you know what you'd do it. Because he really wanted to win. Concentrate on the jump and then worry about it. Imagine how...
The disappointment the next year.
Yeah. Oh, I bought a packed lunch. Just going to bed in and watch the long jump.
Flying knob kid.
I don't know how badly you want to see a teenager's knob.
Seems to be a demand for it.
Like,
Yeah.
it's incredible.
That was brilliant. So innocent.
Yeah.
Just a poor kid. He's probably like forgotten about it himself now. I'm just going to listen to this podcast. Shit, I think that's me.
The flying knob kids. To be honest.
But what's he doing now? Yeah. Is he happy?
Fighting crime.
With one nut out.
Number 6. A remarkable and rather sad story about an incredibly horny man called Clive. 1980s BP Clive, to be exact.
This is from Matty Theo. Fuck. Heard your podcast and made me remember Mum telling me this one about a popping codger she heard of called 1980s BP Clive.
What's a popping clogger?
Yeah,
No
what is
idea. Someone dying?
Oh,
Popping clogger.
codger. What is it?
Anyway. Has to be said as a preface that before he was known as 1980s BP Clive, he was a right famous bummer about town, wore an earring in the gay ear, frequented secret oily parties in a leather jacket purposefully turned inside out, and was known to have an anal opening with a diameter such that whole turds would often drop out mid-stride.
God.
No.
Please.
We're better. Surely we're better than this.
Don't know.
Are we?
Please,
Are
Matty.
we?
Anyway, so we're driving one day and she passes the services and she tells me that that's where 1980s BP Clive exploded. And I was, of course, like, what are you talking about, Mum? And she recounted how she'd been told by a friend, Ms. Sue.
Not married.
This is weird. And she recounted how she'd been told by her friend, Ms. Sue Mycox, that in the late 80s, a man had exploded at the surfaces. And not because of the petrol or nothing, but because before, when services weren't 24/7, this old leathery man would go after hours, stick a deflated rugby ball up his clacker.
Clacker.
Up his clacker.
Then inflate it with the air pumps used to pressurise tyres.
I'm going to stick my neck out and say that's a bad idea. In the cover of night.
I've since Googled it and it turns out it was pretty rife in the 80s before you could just go and buy a fuck-off big dildo. So 1980s BP Clive is going about the services with just an air nozzle sticking out of his considerable arsehole, like some kind of tiny orange tail. And he's inflating this rugby ball at the lowest PPI setting, or what have you.
He's not a madman.
And as it inflates all up in his guts, he's wanking. And he gets it out, and just as he's about to come, it said he'd pinch the nozzle and completely deflate himself. Build up the momentum and get his Jekylls right up.
These words.
3 or 4 times of this violent masturbatory brutalism, and when he gunks up, the spray is arcing a good 20 metres over the forecourt. Now, this is already fucked. So if this is too much, then I understand. But keep reading. If you want to know.
Try stopping him.
If you want to know how it turned out for 1980s BP Clive.
His name.
I can imagine.
Sounds like a computer.
I think you can see where this is heading.
No, I can't.
So yeah, Mum tells me Ms. Sue Mycox told her that 1980s BP Clive got right Jekylled up on some poppers and fucking ignored to change the PPI pressure so that it was on the highest setting.
Oh, shit.
Like for a tractor or some shit. And he's hand to gland combat with his old fella, and the rugger ball is hitting max inflation way too quick. And just as he realises what he's done, or rather not done, the ball's leather skin breaks open and the immense rubber bladder inside the ball inflates so violently that 1980s BP Clive just fucking pops like a bloody wet balloon. and showers blood and guts all over the entire BP. Mzu Mycock told
Gossipy old moo, isn't she?
told Mum that her aunt lived in the same suburb and had awoken at the sound of a piercing scream, followed by a pop,
Scream and then a pop.
then a series of dull, wet, meaty thuds.
What, as his thorax hit the ground?
They knew it was Clive.
Why? From the thud. That sounds like Clive hitting the floor.
Only because of a partially intact piece of jaw and dental records. And I guess because, like I said, he was a right famous bummer.
Right.
Cool beans. Hope this ain't too fucked for you guys.
Who the hell is this bloke?
Moving into the top 5 gossips of the year, and we have Welly Baby. An absolute flipping belter. I mean, surely utter bollocks. But a belter nonetheless.
I feel this dark cloud hanging over me for this one. Here's a rumour from Leyland in Lancashire. Leyland in Lancashire.
Yeah.
14-year-old lad got his 13-year-old sister pregnant about 40 years ago. However, they managed to keep it quiet. She gave birth into a welly in the garden shed. Better safe than sorry. Fed the baby every day and it grew inside the welly. I think we can safely say this is not real.
Can't say.
Eventually it was too big, but it couldn't get out of the welly, so they cut it out of the welly. The baby had grown in...
It's the shape of a welly.
Yeah. The baby had grown into a perfect welly shape, so they abandoned it on the vicar's doorstep near the local church. The vicar came out in the morning to do some gardening and put his normal welly on. Then forced his foot into the baby's mouth, thinking it was the other welly.
Yeah.
Killed it. What a way to go. Buried it in an existing grave and then...
In an existing grave.
And then threw himself off the steeple. The local kids still arranged to meet at Welly Baby's grave.
I'm going to throw up. Oh, God.
Number 4. The 4th best gossip of the year. And my word, this one is a corker. It's all about a bloke called Puffin and his peculiar obsession.
This is from Sam. Hi, Poppy, Joe and David. There was a guy from my hometown called Puffin who was absolutely obsessed with getting baptised.
Oh, wow.
He would go round all the churches in the local area, claim to be interested in the Lord, attend a few Sunday services, get christened ASAP, and then off he'd fuck to the next church.
Puffin.
Why Puffin?
What, he just like having a bit of water on his head?
Yeah. guess so.
ASAP. Went on,
Yeah.
So he'd do a bit of groundwork with a vicar.
Yeah. Get christened ASAP and then off he'd fuck to the next church and repeat.
Oh, good old Puffin.
Oh, fucking hell.
I met him in a pub a few years back and he told me after his 8th pint of ale, I've been baptised over 50 fucking times. I'm the holiest man in Kent.
Amazing.
He smelt of petrol
Nice little aside.
and kept asking people walking by if they'd let him borrow £1 for a play on the fruity.
He's digressing, but I don't mind.
Anyway, what started off as an esoteric hobby apparently recently started to get out of hand.
So
Only
50
recently.
isn't out of hand.
My mate who knows him told me Puffin started asking the priests and vicars doing the baptisms if they could hold him under the water for longer.
How'd you approach that with a vicar?
Oh, if they could hold him under the water for longer and longer periods to mix things up a bit. Because the thrill of the first few times wasn't really there anymore.
Thrill of being baptised.
Oh, God.
I think they generally refused, obviously, because it's a fucking mental request.
I don't think so. Come on, Puffin's side.
Oh, dear.
Oh, why is he called Buffin, please?
Puffin.
Drinking more and more and getting increasingly pissed off with clergy who didn't submit to his request, he started holding his head under the water and refusing to get out until he passed out and someone would have to drag him.
God.
What, in the church?
Yeah,
Just wander
apparently.
in on his own?
The local churches started to cotton onto this. And realising he was a serial offender, they sent a newsletter around to all the churches in the county with a photo of his face saying, "Do not baptise this man."
So funny. Oh, God.
He's now dropped all that and apparently makes a living doing talks in schools about going through puberty.
What a detail. Oh my
God.
God.
Oh, I've got a headache.
Ah, dear. All the best, Sam. Thank you so
Sam.
much,
That was
Sam.
great.
Thanks, mate.
Heavens above. We've moved into the top 3 gossips of this year. Incredible, really. At number 3 we have a long and winding story about a group of horny young boys, set in amongst a beautiful streams and magical forests.
Hi, Gossipmongers. Back when I was 11 or 12, I lived in a lovely rural area with babbling brooks, lush fields and ancient forests, Hertfordshire. It was here me and a group of 3 friends began inexplicably getting our todgers out,
Of course it was.
settling down in a circle for some self-pleasure. Rarely you get someone telling you that they'd done this. One of our group was rumoured to have an unusual penis.
Here we go.
He referred to it as a type 2.
What does he mean by that?
Yeah,
I
what
wonder.
does that mean?
I wonder.
Seen it. And as such, always made his escape when the sessions began. Rumour had it his sister caught him talking to himself about it in front of the mirror.
About what is penis or the Greek wanking?
Of course, we reckon type 2 meant maggot.
Maggot dick.
Kids are cruel. You're sat in a circle wanking. I think you should be... Anyway,
By a babbling brook.
yeah, wanking by a babbling
It's
brook.
romantic.
Where's
lovely.
type 2 heading off? Right. I always hated it when he left, as I now...
Oh, he's gone.
You going? You heading off? I always hated it when he left, as I was now bottom of the pile with the least pubes.
I can't
Not as bad as having a type 2, though. Oh, God. The sessions were instigated by the largest member physically in the group, who, looking back, was the only one who really enjoyed it. He would use a kind of otherworldly language to get us started.
Yeah, I keep picturing like Frodo and all that.
Yeah.
Everyone else is dressed as a knight. He would use a kind of otherworldly language to get us started, namely the word stoshti and loggy.
What, to turn them on?
Yeah, to get them revved up.
Stoshti.
Stoshti and leggy and off we go.
Gandalf.
Uttered in ever more urgent and persuasive tones until we relented.
Stoshti.
You'll never take our stoshti. Uttered in ever more urgent and persuasive tones until we relented and took our positions in the wanking circle.
Took our positions.
The wanking circle.
Like some chants.
The wanking circle. Oh, God. At this time, we used to go exploring around an abandoned house near where Type 2 lived. And after every exhausting the excitement of loosening a few bricks and chalking on the walls, this was Murphy Mob's era, when graffiti was gentle, we began to get bored, and Type 2, sensing what was coming, had already popped home. They're getting bored.
Yeah, the wanking circle's coming.
Stoshti! Stoshti! This is the fucking most surreal thing. 5 minutes later, we're all in a circle, going at it like troopers. To be fair, on my part, I liked it to get it over with.
Oh, getting heart palpitations. This is my favourite one.
Ever.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I always took the precaution of keeping my trousers and pants up at these sessions. But the instigator had them down around his ankles as usual. Halfway through the tugging, an old man appeared from the trees. He may have been the owner, who knows?
From the trees.
I
want this to go on for about 20 pages.
I just remember what the, and I was off.
Type 2 seems years ago.
Book one. That's a
During the terror, though, I had to fly past the instigator, trying to run with his pants round his ankles, and he stumbled into some nettles. I remember running out of the clearing, scared shitless, but laughing madly. The instigator had a stung bottom, and Type 2 is now married with kids. God. Cheers for a great podcast.
Oh.
Johnny, the boy Johnson, standing ovation, mate. Oh, you shouldn't have been forced to wank in a circle, but I'm glad you were.
Number 2. The runner-up to this year's Gossip Crown. I mean, oh really, when it comes to gossip. But my word, didn't it do well to force itself into the final? A gossip which might surprise some, but not others. To others, this story is short, sweet, and has one of the greatest final gossip lines of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a confident little lad called Royston.
This rumour begins and ends in a northwest secondary school around 20 years ago. Royston, a young chap on the periphery of our friendship group, had always been slightly odd and often made unusual claims. For instance, on the first day of the first year, with a deadpan face, he had introduced himself as Gay Boy Roy.
He introduced himself.
There seemed to be nobody else who had come from his primary school, so we don't know if this was him starting afresh by inventing a brand new Royston and looking to distinguish himself.
Wipe the slate clean.
Or whether that had been an offensive nickname he had brought with him and not thought to shed. There weren't any other Roys at our school, so Roy would have sufficed. One notable rumour about him was that in year 9 he'd been caught by a teacher and some pupils in the arts and crafts stock cupboard, completely naked, speaking in tongues, and very slowly masturbating.
Slowly?
Yeah.
Right.
The teacher demanded he stop, and the pupils squealed with shock, delight and disgust. But Royston maintained perfect eye contact with the teacher and gradually finished his activity, chanting louder and louder until the end. I've no idea if the rumour is true, but in year 11, close to the end of our time there, somebody confronted him about the strange event, and his response was to laugh and then shout, "Of course it's true. Don't you know who I am? I'm Gay Boy Roy, and I fucked my dad."
Such confidence.
Yeah. He then ran to the other end of grounds and joined in with the football.
Well, why shouldn't he? He's Gay Boy Roy.
He now has a normal job
He doesn't.
and a seemingly normal wife. I don't really see him around. I probably wouldn't bring it up if we spoke. That was from Anonymous.
He's my hero. He's great.
He is, isn't he?
Yeah.
Fucking hell, I love that first day of school.
Yeah.
Set me stall out.
Hey, how are you doing? Nice to meet you. Yes, it's my first day at St. Mary's Infant School. My name? Oh, it's Gay Boy Roy. Friggin' deal with it. My name? Oh, it's Gay Boy Roy. Friggin' deal with it. Gay, boy, Roy, gay, boy, Roy. We've made it. We're here. The #1 spot. The greatest piece of gossip we received this year. Voted by you, the listeners. What can I say? An absolute monster worm of a tale. With twists and turns. And shit. And vitamin C. So, again, sit back. Pour yourself another warm coconut milk. And enjoy their mighty space worm.
Okay, this is from Jonah. Alright, all. My gossip concerns my mate and specifically his brother, let's call him Jim. A couple of years ago, they attended their uncle's wedding somewhere in deepest rural Essex. It was a posh affair with a sizable marquee set in a lovely countryside setting. Because of the remoteness of the location and in a desperate but probably vain attempt to prevent drink driving offences, camping was available on site. My mate and Jim arrived on the site in the wedding finery ready for a family reunion and the joy of seeing their uncle finally getting hitched. Unfortunately, another uncle was also present, who had recently returned from what had descended into a narcotic fact-finding mission in South America. I say uncle, but I think he was more one of those slightly weird people who hang around your family who you call uncle, but isn't really. My mate and his brother were both in their late 20s, but still weren't entirely sure if he was their uncle or not. As soon as, let's call him Uncle Bob, saw the pair of them, he invited them into his tent for a pre-wedding livener. This turned out to be a solid dosing of weapons-grade acid. But by the sounds of it, was probably something far stronger. My mate isn't into all that and politely declined. Jim, however, showed no such restraint. He immediately consumed the preferred narcotics and slipped into a hallucinatory trance. He remembers Uncle Bob saying that he would look after him.
God.
My mate said that he remembers his brother looking deeply contented with his eyes closed, purring like a cat, and occasionally making harsh guttural squawking noises. But all appeared well. This is where it starts getting weird. Unbeknownst to Bob or my mate, Jim's hallucination had seen him take on the form of a gigantic, aggressive, what can only be described as space worm. Oh God, I'm faint. Oh God, I went all lightheaded.
Worm.
Gigantic, aggressive space worm.
You never would have guessed that.
In his mind, he was flying through the solar system at millions of miles per hour, taking in new galaxies and generally enjoying the wondrous enormity of deep space.
All at a wedding in rural Essex. Took a turn.
Oh dear. Is this Uncle Bob's fault?
It really is Uncle Bob's fault. He's the one who brought the acid.
God.
Taking in
I
new
love
galaxies.
that. Flying around
God.
space eating galaxies. And
Unfortunately, he then decided that in order to be able to reproduce and keep his space worm lineage going, he had to bore into the centre of a planet and eat the fiery core. Okay.
That's what space worms have to do, I'm afraid.
Oh God. Oh dear. This he did in his mind and started tunnelling through the centre of a convenient nearby planet. Oh God. Oh. Obviously, the transition from the vacuum of space into the rocky core of the planet caused his worm body to start juddering violently. Jim was aware that he was doing this, but to my mate and Bob, it looked like he was having a fairly serious seizure.
yeah, don't worry, guys. It's just a space worm.
Fairly serious.
I'm just drilling into a planet, guys. Don't worry.
I've got to eat the whole core. If I'm ever going to have kids.
Oh, fuck. Panicking, but also using the skills he'd learned in South America, Bob declared that the best cure for a seizure was vitamin C powder, of which he had a copious supply for this very eventuality.
Oh, God.
As Jim juddered away, he began trying to spoon feed it to him, but only succeeded in smearing it all over his face and all over his wedding outfit. Little reminder where we are.
Oh, yeah, we're in Essex at a wedding. Uncle's wedding, who's finally settled there.
Oh, God.
Got a marquee.
Oh, fuck. Fortunately, at this moment, and having burst back out the other side of the planet, the space worm returned to normal.
That's all we needed to do. Eat the
It's
corn.
fine, I'm fine now. And Bob thought he'd saved the day. Unfortunately, Jim, brackets the space worm, then moved on to the next stage of its reproductive cycle. Oh dear. He moved on to the next stage of his reproductive cycle, which was to give birth to the fiery core as a new star. From which presumably his space worm son would be born.
Oh my god.
Stop saying.
I don't think it does.
Oh my god.
Temporarily relaxed, my mate and Bob soon became aware that the grunting was becoming more and more frequent, as were looks of great exertion rippling across Jim's face.
Are they still in the tent?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, God.
Whilst they'd been otherwise occupied, the space worm, brackets Jim,
Just to connect those two things. Jim is the space one.
had removed its trousers and now did indeed give birth to a large, slurry-like, hideous star. His shit mixed in with the vitamin C powder encased him in a foul-smelling galactic miasma. The agonies of labour were also causing him to writhe around violently, ensuring that there was very little left of him, including his face and hair left uncovered. Among frantic screams of "What the fuck are you doing?" and "Stop it, you fucking animal," the space worm began the final chapter of its life cycle, which was to eat the placenta left over from the birth of the star. As my horrified mate watched his brother shovel a combo of shit and vitamin C powder into his mouth with his bare hands, whilst groaning ecstatically, Bob decided he'd had enough and made a run for it.
You can always rely on Bob. Caused a fucking meltdown.
Not to be seen again for the rest of the wedding. My mate also had had enough and called an ambulance before also making a run for it
Everyone's left the space
and
worm.
hiding nearby to watch the aftermath.
Oh my god.
To bring this long and weird tale to an end, he watched as the ambulance crew helped his now semi-compos mentis brother out of the tent, covered in shit and white powder, whilst vomiting up the shit he'd already eaten. In front of dozens of horrified wedding guests, and saw him head off to hospital. My mate managed to blag that he'd been nowhere near and pretended he'd been off checking the marquee while this was happening.
Oh, God.
He said the rest of the wedding was a delight, but he had to sleep under a van as the tent was understandably a write-off.
So there we have it. The top 10 gossips of the 2019. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you for sending in your funny gossips this year, and thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. Remember, if you have any unsubstantiated rumours and prittle prattle, then email them to gossipmongers@yahoo.com. Until the next time, goodbye. Bye bye. Goodbye. Bye. Until the next time, goodbye.